So what are the pros and cons of investing in the different types of property, single family residential versus office versus retail versus hospitality versus multifamily, self-storage, mobile home parks? So let's take the pandemic out of the situation. So in the pandemic, obviously office, retail, hospitality are taking a beating. You don't want to mess with those right now until we get through this, but let's take that off the table and look at normal market conditions. And moving forward, we don't know what the future for those types of commercial property holds. So I would stay away from those for a while unless you fully understand the space, fully understand those assets and the markets, and have deep pockets to weather any kind of a sustained vacancy in those types of properties. That would be office, retail, and hospitality, which is hotel. Assisted living, we're still questioning what that is all about. But basically the advantages and disadvantages in general between office, retail, and like multifamily. So with office and retail, the tenant turnover cost can be significant. So many times if you turn over a space in retail or in office, the new tenant is going to ask for what's called tenant improvement money, tenant improvement allowance. And that can be anywhere from $10 to $100 a square foot, depending on the type of use that the tenant is looking for. And when tenants vacate the space, it can be very expensive to turn that space over and release, unless there is somebody that can use the space kind of as is, or you can find somebody willing to take it. So unless you have a really good property in a really great location, it's going to be expensive and sometimes difficult to release a space when office and tenant users turn over and leave those spaces. So those are some disadvantages to office and retail. Now the advantages are usually you could get more money for office and retail per square foot that you can get in a multifamily type property. Sometimes those tenants are more long-term than residential tenants. Single family, the disadvantages of there are you have one tenant per property, so you lose your tenant, you lose all your income. One bad tenant can ruin and put you in the hole, in a very deep hole on single family residential. Same thing can happen in multifamily, but if you have a lot of units, you're spreading that risk out over the number of units under one roof, so the economies of scale are greater. You can do bigger deals in one place. Your operating costs and efficiencies are much better with multifamily. And again, you're spreading that risk out over a number of tenants and with a number of properties in different areas. So you're really hedging and spreading your risk out there with multifamily. So self-storage is kind of the same way. Self-storage is a great space. The advantages of self-storage are you don't have to worry about housing laws and eviction laws and things like that. If somebody doesn't pay you, you can take over the space. You can auction off the items and you can get everything back that you're due, but the difference has to go back to whoever owned it. So when you auction off items in self-storage, you can't keep the difference if you sell off their stuff and it brings you more money than what they owe you. And then of course the downside is you could potentially, be out of pocket on having to get rid of a bunch of junk somebody left to get it out there and dispose of it. So the only other negative in self-storage is it's a fragmented industry. There's a lot of smaller properties all over the place. You need a lot of units to be able to make any kind of serious income or to reach any kind of level of scale. So you have to buy a lot of units. You got to buy a lot of properties to really be able to generate the kind of returns that you can see in multifamily. However, generally self-storage return percentages have outpaced multifamily, retail, and other segments of the markets. The self-storage REITs have done better historically than the other REITs as well. So self-storage is a good space. Mobile home parks, another great space. You're leasing dirt. If you can get away from leasing the homes, you're just leasing dirt. So it's less maintenance, less issues to deal with there. You don't have repair issues and stuff like that. And generally those tenants are going to be good long-term tenants, are going to pay their rent because it's cheap and it costs a lot of money to move the trailers. Now in this given situation in the pandemic, the mobile home parks are taking a bigger hit than most multifamily properties are. And then of course, the office, retail, and hotels are taking a huge hit. Generally hotels are very, very profitable. You can get better cap rates for hotels in normal circumstances. They were starting to get a little bit of pressure before this happened, and there's going to be some really good deals on the other side of this. Again, if you can weather the downturn and weather the amount of time it takes, be able to survive the amount of time it takes to get hotels back up to a decent ADR and decent occupancy levels on the other side of this. We don't know how long that's going to take. We don't know what the future holds, if we're going to get shut down again or if there's going to be another flare-up outbreak, things like that. So you have to be prepared for the worst, plan for the best, be prepared for the worst, hedge all of the downside, spread your risk out as much as possible over multiple tenants, multiple properties. So in general, you want to look for multiple tenant type properties, whether it's commercial, retail, whatever it is. You want multiple tenants versus single tenant. Anytime you have one tenant, you're at risk. When you lose that tenant, very difficult to replace them. Some people love single tenant net leases, but I don't like that because you only have one tenant. And as we are seeing right now, anybody can go bankrupt and anybody can close. So you're kind of left on the hook there, and then you get caught up in a bankruptcy, and it's very difficult to turn that space over. So just be careful, be smart, do your homework, know your market, know the types of properties, the advantages and disadvantages. And that was a question that was asked. So as always, if you have any questions, post them in the comments. I'm happy to make video answering your questions. And this video was in answer of a question talking about the advantages and disadvantages of the different types of commercial properties to invest in.